What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over the last of the match flow stuff. This is match flow part 3. There can always be more that we will add, but this is essentially what I intended for the first section on match flow. You'll see a few things are different and a few things aren't up to par. For example, this is my new selection icon. It has the 1 for player 1, but I'm going to be switching out the main menu buttons to look different. I just didn't get around to that yet, so don't think I've changed anything with that. But you can see I put on some lock symbols and I've changed the player icons for their selections and things. These are just little improvements that I've been making in the background. Nothing to worry about for this episode, but I wanted to point them out since I figured you would see them. Okay, so you can see here, now we had our round counter and our round timer before. But now we're actually going to be able to win enough rounds to win the match, essentially. That's the main point of today. There will be a few things we adjust with the flow just to make things a little bit cleaner. But, like I said, main thing is winning the match. You can hear that there are sound effects now on ready, fight, and when the enemy gets knocked out. Again, all optional, but I wanted to give you guys the opportunity to add them if you'd like to. So you can see that I'm about to beat the opponent. And essentially what's going to happen is we're going to beat him, we're going to get our last win. The mutant is going to play an animation afterwards, essentially a victory animation, and we're going to get a menu to pop up, which is going to let us pick if we want to go back to the main menu, the character select, or redo the fight. So let's win the fight here. He does this like roll and, you know, come in contact with the camera all up in your face. I've just added a very simple widget. It is not fancy looking at all. It does support mouse and controller input as standard default Unreal buttons do, but that's about it. And then I've made all these buttons actually do what they say. So rematch is going to start a rematch. It's going to load right away because we're not actually reloading the scene in this case. When we get into level streaming, we'll reload the scene, and you'll see why that becomes important. I actually left the input stacks uncleared on purpose because you'll see later, to do that rematch like we do, we had to reset everything manually, which the more you get in here, the more complicated that's going to get. So this works for now, and you can actually keep it, and you can use that method. You just have to make sure you're resetting everything. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to essentially determine the winner of the fight. We're going to play either an animation or an actor sequence if you want to move the camera along with the animation. You could see that my animation actually had root motion on it, which I tend to avoid root motion as much as possible because we have not covered any animations with root motion. We will. However, it still a lot of times ends up being more complicated when the animation doesn't need to have root motion. If you have an animation that needs root motion, then that's perfectly fine. But I try to avoid it when it's definitely not needed. It's just a preference thing. So you can see I actually added it there because it doesn't matter. We will be resetting our characters back to their player spawns the next time we start up a level. So it's not a huge deal if they move from that spot and get stuck in that frame. Lastly, we will be making a new widget called Versus End Pop-Up. I specify versus because when we do story mode and things like that, you're going to have different options when the match ends. I just want to make a default one and put it in the bottom left of the screen for you guys so you could kind of play around with it. You by no means have to follow my actual functionality here. So let's start with determining the winner. Now, there's two things we need to do in code. One, we need to decide who the winner was. So in part 2 of this series, part 2 of the match flow sequence within this series, which was episode 51. If you're interested in checking that out, I'll leave a link in the iCard right here to the very first episode of match flow within the fighting game tutorial. It's important because we'll just be continuing further with some of the things we created in that sequence, I should say. Okay, And if you want to catch up on the whole fighting game tutorial, we were 52 episodes in. I know I said 52 last episode, but I was actually incorrect. This is episode 52 right here. So it's been a full year that we've been working on this series. One episode a week, every Sunday. So anyway, just a cool little thing. I really enjoyed that, and I wanted to point it out. But here's the first episode if you want to catch up from the very beginning. Okay, to get started, as I said, we had has lost round, which was a Boolean to determine what the character should do when they lose a round. In this case, I was having the mutant fall over and lay on the ground for a bit. You know, he got knocked out. He has to go to round 2. So in the other case, I want to show a victory animation for the player that wins. So I want a has won match Boolean. That way I can determine who's the winner, what the camera should focus on at the end, and what the character who won should be doing. You could also use this, of course. If has won match is true, then, you know, play that certain animation. And if has won match is true for the other player, then we know that this player has lost the match. So you could also play like a losing animation if you wanted. I didn't feel that that was necessary, but there you go. So make sure you add this Boolean. We scroll up to where our functions are. I have a win match function that's just blueprint callable. Win round was blueprint callable in part 2. This is basically the same setup. Just make sure you call it win match. Let's go into our code. Set up our defaults as we do every episode. So has won match is false by default. Then let's scroll down to has won round. Excuse me, win round, not the Boolean. Win round, the function. Once we're in win round, you can see the logic here was we set whoever wins the round, the other player has lost the round. We increment the amount of rounds won for this player, and then we notify the blueprints that the round has ended and we should update the icons. Well, that's excellent. We still want the logic to occur that the player has lost the round and or that the player has won the round, even if it's the third one, even if it's the one that's winning them the match. I still want the enemy to fall over on the ground. I still want the sound effects to be played for knockout, things like that. You can determine and change this to your liking, so no worries if that's not how you want to set yours up. But because I'm setting up mine that way, I'm not doing any sort of checks for rounds won in the code. I just have win match as a separate function. Win match, essentially, I disable the player's movement to be able, or the player to be able to move or attack with their character, and I set the has won match Boolean to be true. The reason I do this is just so I can play a victory animation and the player has no control over the character at that point. Okay, so if we go into our blueprints now, we can go to our Mutant Animb BP and get that set up first. First things first, you guys are used to this by now, but I have a way to go from idle to match 1. Match 1 is a new state I made. As usual, you can right click and hit add state to add as many states as you want. Call it whatever you want. Mine's match 1 and I have mutant victory on here. So this is him rolling and running toward the camera. You can see there is root motion because he starts right around here and he ends up all the way over here. It's not a trick with the animation or the camera. This animation actually has root motion. So he's actually running toward the camera. Now you could see when I did my victory animation, my stages are actually just one-sided. They don't have any wall covering it. So if you go to do an animation like I have, you may need to adjust your stages to work with it. However, that's a minor thing that can always be adjusted later if you really are set on one specific animation. I just picked one that I liked from Mixamo, so of course I can always change it if I end up not wanting to fill in the rest of my stages. But I do have an Animb Notify that I added to the very end, well, not quite the very end, but one of the very last frames for the victory animation here. So you can see he gets stuck in this frame, and I have the camera kind of pointed at him like this, somewhere like that. So I have an Animb Notify. You just right click, add notify, new notify, and then you can make whatever one you want. I called mine Victory Animation Finished. Once this part of the animation has been reached, then I'm going to pop up the menu. The reason I did this is you can do it on transition end and things like that, but putting it at the end of the end of the animation is a good way to determine when you're ready to pop up the menu. This is particularly helpful because if different characters have different lengths of victory animations, for example, a mannequin might do a little dance and it only takes about 1 second, then I don't want to, wait extra time to pop up the menu. Once the victory animation is done, we should pop up the menu. So I like putting it at the end of the victory animation. Just a little anim notify. Okay, it's quite simple. I play the mutant victory in the match 1 state. I make sure it doesn't loop. And I don't have any way to return back to idle or any other state for that matter. Since when we do rematch, we're going to spawn new characters, we don't have to ever reset the state. Essentially, this character can end in the match 1 state and just stay there forever. The condition to go from idle to match 1 is pretty simple. The boolean that we set up has 1 match. If you want to, you can have it go from every single state that you have. Any state where the player can stay there indefinitely should be adjusted to make sure that match 1 or has 1 match, that boolean, can be taken to this transition. I'm only doing it from idle. There we go. There's our state. There's our match 1. You can see that I don't have any transition events applied to the animation. So the only event we have to worry about in the event graph is the one I've added on the anim notify that I added on the animation itself. Okay, one other thing. This get ready for next round function that we made last time. This is good. It does everything we need. However, we don't want the rounds to continue and this logic to continue if the player has won the game. I've left a comment up above. You can read it if you want. It'll be, I have to zoom out really far and you still can't read it entirely. All logic regarding round ending and match ending should be done in the game mode for the easiest, best solution. This method can be used to ensure the round timing is always reliant on character animations. And that is true. So I'm not saying that this is a terrible way to do it. To be honest, you could easily do it this way and not cause any issues. If you want it to be the easiest and the most reliable, it'll work for every character no matter what. You'd want to do this in the game mode. And honestly, the game mode is really, they should be the one that kind of triggers the round end and things like that. I did things a little bit differently than usual because I like it to be reliant on the character animation, especially since I don't have access to making my own animations quite as easily as like a studio may have, or if you're an animator, you may have more access to it. I'm using Mixamo animations, so they're going to be different lengths, and I can cut them up, but I kind of like playing the entire animation. Some are shorter, some are longer. So I like putting them on the character animation and letting that perform the logic for me. I just wanted that to be known. I know it's going to get a little weird here because I'm like determining if the match winner was this character in the animation blueprint of a character. So it's a little strange, but it's just to kind of cover my back and make sure one character can play their animation the whole way through and another character, either doesn't go and perform another animation or something like that. Get ready for next round. As I said, we talked about this in the last episode. I'm going to just adjust it a little bit. So I still set the players to be able to not be able to move once we're here, because if get ready for next round essentially means the player was knocked down. If they're knocked down, then we want to make sure they can't move. We put a delay because we're going to spawn the ready and fight text. However, we only want to spawn the ready and fight text if no one has won the match. So I have a function in the default game mode BP that we'll go over in a second that determines if there was a winner. Basically, the way I do this, and it's simply because I don't have a reference to my game mode in your animation blueprint. If you have a reference to it, you can go ahead and just use your game mode reference. But for me, I'm actually getting the character reference that I have, mutant character reference, casting it to my mutant character BP, since my blueprint class of that character has a game mode reference, but it has a game mode reference to the code class, so I cast that to the blueprint class. I didn't feel that it was necessary for me to have a game mode reference in my animation blueprint, quite simply because I'm not going to use it anywhere else that I can see. However, I do want this logic to happen in the animation blueprint because of the reasons I previously mentioned. So I am going to go ahead and just use these two casts instead of keeping a reference to it the entire time. And that should be fine. Either way should be fine. I'm just kind of explaining my thinking. It's just kind of a little bit weird, so I thought it demanded a little bit of extra explanation. Regardless, all I'm essentially trying to do here is get this determine match winner function. Determine match winner function is a function that I made in the default game mode blueprint. It does what it sounds like. So if a winner is found, then it will return the winner index, 0 or 1, player 1 or player 2. And if no winner is found, it will return -1. So essentially, I'm determining if a winner was found at all, and then I'm going to perform the corresponding logic. Determine match winner if it's greater than -1, because as I've said, it returns -1 if there is no winner. Then we're going to go ahead and do all this logic, which is going to be me playing the animation, switching the camera to the correct camera for the victory animation, and then putting the camera in place. If it's incorrect, we're going to do the same logic as last time. This isn't anything new. I just moved it to this false. So we make sure that the mutant character reference is no longer lost around. That way they can get up. We do a delay, and then we trigger the ready and fight texts. Okay, so we'll go over determine match winner in a second. But if a winner was found, then we know that if we're getting ready for next round, this was the loser of that previous round. Because you only reach that Animb notify if you're knocked out on the ground. So we're going to grab the character BP, grab the HUD reference, set it to be invisible. We no longer want to see the HUD. We want a more cinematic approach for the victory animation. We're going to grab the other player, because the other player is the winner. Our super camera reference, which is the same camera that we use for our super move. I just repurposed it and added another function called swap to victory camera view. To be honest, I should probably rename this from super camera to just like additional camera. It's essentially the camera that I want to use whenever I want to focus a certain thing, but I don't want to move the actual game camera around. You can use it for as many things as you want. You're going to move it every time before you set view target with it. So you can repurpose it for multiple things. And I have a function in here, swap the victory camera view, which we'll go over in a second. And then I set view target with blend. That way I can actually look through what that and see through what that camera's seeing. Let's start off by going into the super camera, simply because the swap to victory camera view is very, very easy if you've been following this series. You can actually notice the similarities between these two events. One is swap to super camera view, and the other is swap to victory camera view. Now, if you have been following the series and you know this event and you have this event in your super camera, guess what? Copy the whole darn thing and go ahead and paste it down here. They're the exact same function. I just changed the positioning of the camera where I want it to go. That way it looks good for my animation. Now, you don't have to do this. You could also decide to play a actor sequence on our character blueprint, like we have done several times in the past. You can see that we have our super sequence and our entrance sequence that we've both done as actor sequences. So you do whatever you want. If you'd rather do an actor sequence, go for it. If some characters would be better as an actor sequence, go for it. If you want them to just have a pose, super camera. If you want to just have it in a stationary spot where the character moves, super camera. It's all up to you. We've done several examples of both, so you can choose as you wish. I'm not going to totally go over why I chose my positions and stuff, but just in case you need a refresher on your super camera, right click, add custom event, and make sure you have a character reference input parameter. That way we know what character to focus. So we basically just check if the character reference that got passed into this event when we call it, which you can see is other player, because that's the winning player. If it's equal to our player 1 reference that we have in our super camera, which again, not to get off track, but it's just something we set up above in begin play. Then we target the logic for player 1, or we target the logic for player 2. Okay? So I just set up some values, and that's it. Literally nothing is different between the super camera and the victory camera. So I'm not going to cover this, what I did. I will give you a shot of this if you want to see everything, just in case you're not familiar with the super camera. But I'm not going to cover it again because at this point it feels like it would be unnecessary. So this is the super camera one. This is begin play. That's all I got. That's how I set mine up. But see, I wanted to give this series as much freedom as possible. I love teaching you guys everything I can teach you, and I'm learning a lot along the way too. But in this case, I've already covered it. I don't want to go, you know, like make it so, oh, you have to follow this exact thing. Make an actor sequence or make a new event in your super camera, and you'll be good to go. Just remember to actually call that event that you made, and then set view target with blend, so that we can actually see through that camera. Okay. Now, one more thing we have to do in our animation blueprint, then we will get to our game mode. We have our anim notify. This is on the mutant victory animation. Remember, right here, this anim notify. Once we make this, as usual, you can right click and search for your animation. Victory animation finished. Right here. Actually be this one, the one that says event in front of it. And then you get this guy. Okay? On him, all I want to do is delay, add a short delay, which is optional if you want to do it. But I want to add a little bit of time from the animation ending and the widget popping up. So I do a delay, and then I create widget, like this. And then I'm going to put in my versus end pop-up class, which I know we have not made yet. And I'm going to add that to my viewport. Okay, so if you want to go ahead and solidify that, just go somewhere in the content browser, right-click, user interface, widget, blueprint. Make a new one. Again, I called mine versus end pop-up. You can go ahead and make it now if you'd like. We're going to be covering it in a second because I'm going to go over the game mode logic first. And then make sure you switch the class that you're spawning of the widget here to that new widget that you just made. Now that that's done, that's everything the Mutant Animb BP. Let's go over the game mode logic that has changed. On round start, I'm doing the same stuff that I have been doing. Round end is the same stuff I have been doing, with the exception that I'm playing a sound effect now. If you want to do this, when the character gets knocked out, I just go ahead and play sound 2D knockout. It's like the announcer making the sound. So I don't do it in the animation blueprint, I just do it in the game mode. And then in event tick, we're just checking for time over. It's the same logic as before. I haven't changed anything with it. But what we do need to do is make the logic that we're going to implement for a rematch, and we need to make the new function determine match winner. So let's go over the function determine match winner. This is what we were calling in the, whoops, I don't know where that came from. This is what we were calling in the animation blueprint to determine if there was a winner. Remember, when the round was ending and we were determining what logic we should perform, I was going ahead and calling this function determine match winner and checking if it was greater than -1. So here is that function. I get my player 1 reference, I get the number of rounds that they've won. I check if it's greater than or equal to the num rounds in our game mode. You can see the comment here. The number of rounds each fight lasts. This can be best of or must win and can be overwritten by the value in base game instance. So, num rounds, you can see it here, the default value is 3. So, by default, the number of rounds, we have to win 3 rounds to win our match. So, with that said, then if player 1, their number of rounds won is greater than or equal to that value, then we've won the match. Quite simple. So if that's true, player 1, we call the win match function, which is the function we made in code. And then I return 0. And a player index of 0 is a player index, or is player 1. Player index 0 is player 1. And the way I do this is my determine match winner function has an output parameter. I called it winner index, and I made it an integer. Then you quite literally can just call it return node, and it will come with your output parameters. Okay, if this is false, then that means that either player 1 has not won the match and player 2 has not won the match, or player 2 won the match, and that's it. So if this is false, we check player 2, the same logic. We grab player 2, rounds 1, check if it's greater than or equal to the number of rounds we need to win, and then if it is, we go ahead and call player 2 win match and return the winner index of 1. Player index 1 is player 2. If both of these are false, see false, false, then nobody has won the match yet. Our winner index is -1. If our winner index is -1 in our animation blueprint, this is where we do the logic to just continue. We trigger the next round. We let the mutant that got knocked down get back up, things like that. Otherwise, if somebody has won, then it will go ahead and pick the corresponding player that won, hide the HUD, and set the camera to focus on them instead. That's how my logic is working here. Okay. That's all we have to do in our game mode for now. There is one other thing we have to do, and this is just essentially reset all the data upon a rematch. But we have to get into the... Okay, so let's go to our versus end pop-up widget. What I did was quite simple. I've added an image, literally brought an image onto the screen. I gave it a slightly transparent background. So you can see I've made it black with an alpha of 0.23. So it's slightly transparent, but that way it stands out a little bit from the background. And then I don't have anything else changed on the image. And then I just added 3 buttons, each with a child of text. So you can drag a button onto the screen, drag the text into the hierarchy window on the button. You'll see that this says widget can't accept additional children because I already have one, but that would work if I did not. Then on the button, I have size to content. That way the button will resize to make sure that the text can fit on it. So you don't have to adjust the sizes of the buttons if you don't want to. And there you go. I made one rematch, one character select, and one main menu. So we're going to do standard procedure here. We're going to go ahead and click on each button, rematch, character select, and main menu. Scroll all the way down to the bottom of the details panel in events, and click on pressed, the little plus sign. It'll make 3 events in your event graph. And then here is the logic we want to do. So first of all, in event construct, we want to make sure that we focus this widget right off the bat. We no longer need control of the characters, so we just want to focus this widget and be able to control it with our keyboard or controller. It should not be required that we use our mouse. So we're going to get player controller 0. We're going to grab our rematch button, which if you can't grab it for any reason, make sure you check is variable. Then, dragging off of the get player controller, you set input mode, game and UI, or you could also just do UI only. I'm just so used to doing game and UI. You can leave everything else the same, but make sure you drag your rematch button as the in widget to focus, or whatever button you have as your top. That way you start at the top of your menu. Then we get our game mode, cast it to the game mode that we're currently using, and set our reference. That way we can call a proper function on it, which is what we do if we press rematch. And okay, so here are our 3 events. It's one for each button press. On our rematch, we want to call our reset match values function from our game mode reference that we just set in the construct. I mentioned it earlier, but we did not cover it. It's this thing that I've written in this comment. And then we want to remove this widget from parent, remove self. And quite literally just remove from parent. And that's how you get rid of the widget here. The versus end pop-up widget. Now, these other things don't entirely work, quite simply because we don't do level streaming. So I set up kind of how it would work. The main menu button is easy enough. You just call open level and give it the name. And I give it main menu as the name. You can do some things and pass some options and stuff, but quite frankly, we're going to be getting into some level streaming where this is easier for us. So I wouldn't really go too far into that. You're going to need level streaming to have animated loading screens and things like that. At least it'll make it a whole heck of a lot easier. And we're going to be getting into that very soon. So don't worry too much, but I'm just showing you kind of how it will be set up. This is to go back to the main menu. The character select button will go back to the main menu, but you'll actually get stuck on the main menu because you have other widgets that are up. You could go ahead and remove the press any key screen and the actual main menu screen, and then create the character select widget and add it to the viewport. It's a little forced, but you can go ahead and do it if you want. Okay. And lastly, if we go into our default game mode BP, you can go ahead and see what we've set up. We essentially are going to reset all the values that we had in here. We want to reset everything as if it's a fresh game. Now, when we implement level streaming, it'll be very simple. We just pass the data along, restart the match, essentially reload everything. We don't have to forcefully do this. Without level streaming, we're going to need to do all this. Not the end of the world, and some games actually never end up implementing level streaming. However, we are going to. I wanted to throw a quick little thing together here so you can kind of get a feeling of what's going on here behind the scenes. So I have this reset match values event in my game mode. Now, again, as I mentioned in the animation blueprint, this is kind of a hacky method of doing this. We're essentially resetting all of our variables that we need to be reset, simply because we're not reloading a level. If we were doing this with level streaming, we would reload our level, we would essentially just restart the entire scene with the correct parameters. Since we're not doing that, the way we're doing a rematch here is essentially resetting everything back to the default and then going through the logic again. And again, I intentionally left the input buffer, the icons on the screen, up instead of clearing them. That way, you could see why this becomes an issue. But if you're careful with it, you actually could do it like this just fine. I wanted to show it to you, and then you can decide whether you want to implement it or not. So, make a new event. We've done this hundreds of times. Add custom event right here. We're going to use reset match values as the name. I'm going to go through and reset everything that I find necessary to reset. Rounds 1 for both player 1 and player 2, reset them back to 0. Then, get all widgets of class, the base game mode HUD. I get index 0 because I should only have one HUD up at a time, so this should be the one we want. I want to update round circles. I want to update it for player 1 and player 2, so player index 0, player index 1, and set the rounds 1 back to 0 and 0. Then I'm going to go ahead and destroy player 1 and player 2. A little bit redundant to be doing all this. However, I want to make absolutely sure no remnants of their victories or anything like that is remaining. So destroy actor on player 1 and player 2. And then we set the round time back to 99. It's a new match. And then I go through the begin play logic again. Because everything that we're doing in begin play can go ahead and happen again now that all this stuff has already occurred. We've reset our stuff. We've destroyed player 1 and player 2. So we need to go ahead and set these up again. The rest of it's the exact same as our begin play for the game mode, except for this part, which is to set up the camera upon rematch. Remember, since we're not reloading the scene, we were still targeting the super camera last time. Because I used the super camera, at least in my example, to determine where the character was going to be, right? To determine what the scene was going to be when the versus menu popped up at the end. We never reset to the fighting game camera. So if we're not reloading the scene, we need to do that now. So we have to have both players to be able... The camera needs to reference both players, plain and simple. In our camera, I'll go ahead and open this up. This is our default camera, so our fighting game camera. Let me go ahead and offset this. It looks a little bit nicer. I didn't add a comment to this one, and I should have. But, okay, so going to our default game mode BP. Remember we destroyed player 1 and player 2? Well, our default camera, this is our fighting game camera, it needs player 1 and 2 references. It needs these references to determine where the camera should be. So if they're destroyed and we spawn a new camera, it won't work. At least it won't do what we want it to do. An easy way to remedy this is instead of doing it with the initial logic where we had everything on resetting all the match data, So you can see I've intentionally raised this out of the way of everything so it was a little bit easier for you to see. But essentially, after these players have been spawned, the loop is completed for going through all the player starts. All the players have been spawned, both player 1 and 2. Then we go ahead and get all actors of class, our default camera, because remember, we did not change scenes. We did not destroy the camera. The default camera is still there. We're just not using it. We're still using the super camera. We want to get 0, index 0 from this array. The way you do this is get all actors of class, and then you just pick the class that you want, default camera. And then you drag off of your array and type get. Just like that. And now, again, we're only ever going to have one default camera. We could have maybe several super cameras if we want to. I mean, we can have one, we already do have one for each player, which is intended, and that's okay. But for default cameras, we should probably only ever have one. I can't think of a good reason to have more than one. So you can get index 0, and that's a safe way to use that. And then I'm calling a function, or an event, that I made called useCamera, which is in our default camera. It's, again, basically resetting the logic to what we want to have, and then starting the logic over by performing begin play again, just like we did in the game mode. So make a custom event. Call it useCamera. Make sure you grab player controller 0, grab self. We want self default camera to be the new view target. So drag off of player controller, set view target with blend, drag in self as the new view target, and then drag this into begin play. And then it will go through, set up the camera as usual, and the match will successfully restart, and essentially restart. The only thing I'm not doing here, again, is the input buffer. So if you'd like to continue to use this method, that is perfectly fine. Go ahead and grab your HUD reference and clear out the icon array that is being displayed to your vertical box in your input buffer widget. And then they will all be gone when the match starts. It'll be like a fresh start. But if you don't want to do all this extra work, we will be doing some more of this when it comes to level streaming, and you'll see kind of a more professional way to do it. It's more of a way that you'll see it done in AAA games and things like that. So I'll show you both methods. I don't think it hurts to learn a method, even if it's not necessarily the best method, quote unquote. But if it's a method you can use, it's good to learn it. It's good to know the difference between which one's better or worse in what scenario, in my opinion. Some people would argue that, but I think those people are just a little bit stuck up. Okay, so that's our game mode done. Now, essentially at this point, we are done with what we want to do for this episode. And this is a long episode. So I'm not going to waste a lot of your time, but I do want to go over the sound effects for ready and fight, just in case you guys would like to add them. They're very, very simple, but I'll show you where I added them so that you can get the proper timing down. So if you go to your base game mode HUD, and where we're triggering our fight and ready text, we're going to go ahead and play the sound. So we have this trigger screen messages and this trigger new round messages. Trigger screen messages is the very first one. It's where we do ready and fight when the fight begins. So go ahead, make your ready text like we were already doing, and just add between the make ready text and the delay that we have, go ahead and add a play sound 2D, just like this, and then go ahead and add your sound effect file. It's quite simple. Then, same thing with fight, where we make the fight text, and between the delay, so between that and the delay, we go ahead and play sound 2D, and I play my fight sound effect. Then in my trigger new round messages, this is where we only do the logic for between rounds, like someone was knocked down, they're getting back up. We want to do the make fight text and delay. We want to, in between those two, play sound 2D fight. And that will cover all your cases. I mean, you can go ahead and add more or less if you want, different functionality than what I've got, but it's as simple as that. And then you have sound effects in your game. I do have a few other things I could show you. They're definitely not required, but just some things that I did that I thought were worth mentioning. So some people have brought up to me that my stuns weren't actually stunning for a lot of good reasons, simply because I never actually stopped the characters from doing much when they were stunned. So now I can't... Basically everywhere there's an action that can be done that the character should not be able to do while they're stunned, I just went ahead and added this to the if statement, and it works like a charm. I should have done this before, so I apologize for not, but thank you for everyone who pointed it out to me. Basically, in jump, they can't jump if they're stunned. They can't start crouching if they're stunned. They can't start blocking if they're stunned. They can't move if they're stunned. Same for if they're trying to move with a controller. Then, they can't do any of their attacks if they're stunned. Same with exceptional attacks. Another thing I wanted to go over with you is, you know how I have the state system in the character? Basically, we have an enum that describes what state the character is currently in. Well, that's good. It works perfectly fine for what we need it for. However, people brought up for crouching attacks, which we actually don't have in the game yet. If we have the state crouch and we want to go to a certain attack, depending on how we set up the states, it could ruin it. And same with if you're crouching and you get hit, should you be in crouch? Should you be in stun? And we could make one for crouch stun, but you guys were totally right. I screwed that up. I should have thought about that a little bit more ahead of time. So instead, I took out VE_crouched, or crouching, whatever I had it, and I made a boolean for crouching. That way we can use the boolean to determine that we're crouching, but then still use the state systems, and that also works like a charm. So just to show you guys, I added a boolean, if I could find it. I added the boolean is crouching right here. That's the character crouching. Quite simple. And just everywhere where we were using the E character state crouching, I've now made it is crouching. Control F for this, by the way. So when we start crouching, this becomes true. When we stop crouching, it becomes false. When we're moving right, we make sure that we cannot crouch while we're moving right. Or we make sure that we're not crouching when we move right, because we don't want to move while we're on the ground. That will fix that issue as well, because you might have noticed that sometimes if you crouch and are holding right, you'll actually move while you're crouched on the ground, which you don't want to be able to do, or at least I didn't intend for that. So make sure in the move right function and the move right controller, you add not crouching as a condition. We do have the diagonal inputs that we added during one of the input buffer episodes. I believe it was episode 5. We do want to be crouching for those, as you press down and right. So make sure you check is crouching instead of the enum. Same with move right controller. And there you go. The crouching logic has now been fixed. One last thing I want to point out to you guys. In the character blueprint, where we add our input stack, I got two questions from two different people about how to limit the input stack. And I thought it was a good idea. I've actually limited mine. I don't know if you've noticed. That way it doesn't go the whole way off the screen. It actually only goes to, I will show you. Okay, so you'll see that the input stack actually does not go off the screen. I can go ahead and do as many things as I want, and it actually caps right above the super meter. So that is because I am now limiting how many items can be in there and then removing older entries. So allow me to show you how to do that if you're interested. You go into your character where you're adding your input stack. I have a function, or where you're adding icons to your input stack. I have a function P1 add input image and P2 add input image. In these functions, I was just adding everything. I was just saying, okay, is this a valid input? Do we have an image for it? If so, clear the children and then add the whole stack. Well, that's good. It works, but it goes off the screen. And also it will continue to build indefinitely, which could slow you down eventually if you keep doing it and you have a really long fight. So, a good way to do this and remedy this issue is to grab your P1 icon images array, loop through them. You can see we're actually doing it here where we're adding the child, and that's okay. But do it again afterward. And we make sure that our index of this array is greater than a certain amount, however many you want to be able to display. So I want to be able to display 12 or 13. I want to be able to display 13. So however many it takes for my screen to, you know, where I want it to stop. I want it to stop above my super meter, and 13 was the magic number. So basically, if the array index is greater than 12 on this, I want to remove the index. I loop through the whole thing, and I remove all of them. If it's false, it's not greater than 12, then we want to keep it, so we don't do anything. But that way, you only ever have as many as the game decides you will have, and that way it doesn't build forever, and it doesn't look really ugly. So make sure you do this for player 1 and player 2 if you want that effect. If you like it the other way, then it's perfectly fine. You don't have to touch it. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this episode. If this helped you with match flow, I think we're good with match flow for now, and we should have everything that we need to have, then please subscribe. It does more for me than anything else you can do for the channel. It's completely free, and it'll let you know when I'm coming out with new videos, so you can check them every Friday and Sunday. I want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon and YouTube membership subscribers over this last year. Just within 1 year, we've come this far in making our own game, and I really appreciate you all for putting your faith in me and making your games using this tutorial series. I mean, it's so cool to see what all of you can do and what all of you are interested in doing and working on. It's really nice to see it come to life and see, you know, help everyone with their issues, see how everyone thinks. It's a really cool thing. So thank you so much for all the support. Really appreciate you guys. If you guys had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord. I can't leave an iCard, but you can look in the description. I've got the link. You click it and you'll automatically join. We'll be able to help you with any issues you had. Lastly, guys, if you want to come support us on Twitch, I've recently been playing some Demon Souls, and we're going to start Little Hope this Friday. So I'm playing Little Hope from the Dark Pictures anthology, and I've been playing some Demon Souls, which, as you can imagine, is pretty darn fun. Alright, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.